What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some big news as it relates to Michael Porter Jr. and the Denver Nuggets. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials in the description as well, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the Nuggets have had an up and down season to begin the year. It's basically just been, if Nikola Jokic is on the floor, they're a very good basketball team. If he's not on the floor, they're not that good. Michael Porter Jr. had plenty of struggles to begin the season, and unfortunately for him, it's only gotten worse. Got news today that he is going to miss the remainder of the season with a back issue. It's something that we kind of heard about a week ago, and it was some kind of nerve issue. It wasn't really speculated on exactly what that would mean for him, for his season. Like I said, he was struggling to begin the year, and now he's out for the season, and he's going to have back surgery. And this is something that we talked about a little bit at the time of the draft for him, as well as when they handed out this new big extension for him, which is a big part of everything we're going to be talking about in this video. At the time that Michael Porter Jr. was drafted, everybody knew he was an incredibly talented player. He was one of the top high school recruits in his class. He didn't play that much in college as a result of some injury stuff. But whenever a player that talented does drop, there has to be a reason for it. And for him, it was injury concerns. And to this point in his career, none of that stuff had popped up. He'd been healthy. He'd been really productive. He'd been better earlier than I think a lot of people would have expected. And he was a huge part of what Denver was going to do in the long term. And coming into this season, it was a huge year for him because Jamal Murray was going to miss most of, if not the entirety of the season due to a knee injury he suffered at the end of last year. And so if Michael Porter Jr. was going to be a legitimate third star for this team, an all-star caliber player that was going to be able to create shots, create for others, defend as well, we were going to see it this year, especially on the offensive end of the floor. One, we didn't see that, and two, now he's gone down with an injury. So we're going to talk about what that means for him, for this team, for the long term of it, and just kind of, where Denver is at now. So the biggest concern here in terms of this season is obviously Denver does not have a chance to win the title this year. There was some speculation that with the West being pretty up in the air, obviously Golden State and Phoenix have pushed themselves way far ahead of the pack to begin the season. But with the West being up in the air, there was some speculation that Denver could possibly be an under-the-radar finals team. Jokic being the MVP is incredible. Porter Jr. potentially stepping up during the year, using that experience to be really good, even once Jamal Murray potentially returned to the team late in the season. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen. Now, you could make the argument that in the long term, obviously, you want Michael Porter Jr. to be healthy, but the idea of this not being a title season could be better in the long term for this team because you're not rushing Jamal Murray back. There's no reason to bring him back any earlier than you need him to, and you can hopefully begin next year with those three guys, Jokic, Murray, and Michael Porter Jr., all fully healthy and ready to go to begin next year, where they are going to be one of the top teams in the conference, assuming those guys are healthy. The other part of this, as it relates to kind of the long-term outlook of this group, is the big extension that they gave to Michael Porter Jr. This guy's going to be making a ton of money over the next 5 years. They signed him to an extension earlier than they needed to, but they obviously felt confident in his health and his ability to sign him to a max contract. And we talked about this before the season. When they signed him to an extension, when they signed Aaron Gordon to an extension, they already had Jamal Murray on one, and Jokic is going to get a new one as well. He's going to get a supermax. They locked into this core group. They made the Aaron Gordon trade last year. He was a really good addition for them. They realized, you know what, these four guys, it doesn't really matter who the fifth player is. These four guys work well together. We've got enough offense, enough defense. Let's lock this group in and let's try and push for titles. We've rebuilt. We've made great selections with Murray, Porter Jr., Jokic. We made a nice trade. This is our core. We're going to spend a ton of money to do it, but this is our group. Now, half those guys have suffered significant serious injuries since signing those extensions, and it obviously is a huge concern in the long term for Denver. And it's hard to fault them for wanting to lock down Porter Jr. and for wanting to lock down Aaron Gordon. It's really difficult to say that they made the incorrect decision there because they absolutely could have made the finals last year. You could argue that given the way the season ended last year, with Phoenix getting a pretty, you could say a lucky run on their way to the finals in terms of the opponents that they played. I still think they were a fantastic team. They're a very good team this year, but a lot of people have made the point that it wasn't the most difficult run to the finals of all time through the Western Conference. You could make the argument that there was always going to be a team, whether it be Phoenix or another team, that had that kind of path and had a real legitimate chance to make the finals on a, from a team that hadn't been there before, not a team like the Lakers due to their injury stuff. You could make the case that the Nuggets were really in the best position to make that happen last year because they make the Aaron Gordon trade. because they were missing that Jeremy Grant component. Once he left, they were looking for a replacement for that. The Gordon trade looked fantastic as soon as they got him, and then a handful of games into that, Jamal Murray gets hurt. They're not going to, compete for the title without Jamal Murray. And so it's hard to fault them for locking down this group. And it's hard to say that that was the incorrect decision. I think if you do want to fault them for it, if you do want to say that they made the wrong decision, the thing that you can point to would be being in such a hurry to sign Porter Jr. and signing him to a max with the injury issue stuff that he brought with him into the league. And obviously he's very, very good, has all the potential in the world, but from a productivity standpoint, hadn't necessarily produced on the same level of other guys, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, for example, getting a max contract. Shai had done a lot more on the court productivity-wise than Porter Jr. had to that point in his career. But at the end of the day, we all kind of know how these max contracts work, right? If you're a young player, and especially for a team like Denver that doesn't get a lot of opportunities to bring in legitimate future all-star, all-NBA caliber players, which from a talent standpoint, I think Michael Porter Jr. is there, from a future potential standpoint. If you get a guy like that and he's really good on his rookie contract, you sign him to a max. That's just how it works. You look around the league at a variety of different players that have max contract extensions, guys like Kristaps Porzingis. Like, if you show it, they're going to jump on that. You're going to get the max, and it's just the way that it works. And there's no real middle area. It's, guys are making rookie contract numbers. Some players around the league are making 15 to 20, and then everybody else is on a max. So, like, even if Luka and Michael Porter Jr. are making the same amount of money, obviously they're not the same level of player, but that's just the situation those two teams were in. They each signed their players to a max, and Luka's is worth a little bit more because of the All-NBA stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just how it works. And so I don't necessarily think you can fault Denver for the way that they approached it, unless you want to say they were a little bit too early on it and, maybe could have waited a year. And then if this kind of stuff did end up happening as it did, then maybe you're a little bit more cautious in the long-term extension talks. But there wasn't a ton. There was a little bit, but there wasn't a ton from an injury perspective to indicate that this was going to be a problem for Michael Porter Jr. in his time in the league. Before he got there were teams that didn't even have him on the draft board because of some of the injury concerns they had as related to his back. It's unfortunate that stuff is now popping up, but it's not like he played 20 games in his first couple of seasons in the league or anything. They signed him to a max. So it's unfortunate the way that it worked out. And hopefully, my personal hope is that he can come back fully healthy, ready to go, and the Nuggets are a great team next year because they're really, really fun. I mean, the Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic pick and roll is really tough to stop. To have another player then on the wing that can create, that can make plays, that can space, that can score, that can run with the second unit, they've really done a fantastic job, especially considering where they came from. They've probably done more with less than any other team around the league when it comes to a rebuild. You think about Murray as I think he was the 7th pick in the draft, which isn't particularly high from NBA standards in terms of getting like an all-star caliber guy. Of course, Jokic in the second round, Porter Jr. in the late lottery, the trade for Gordon. They've done a really, really good job, and they deserve a chance to make a run at the finals. They just can't get everybody healthy all at the same time. So hopefully this won't be an issue for Porter Jr. moving forward. He'll get this stuff solved. He'll have the surgery. He'll get healthy. And then next year, they'll be ready to rock and roll because you can look at the payroll sheet. Jokic's number isn't up there yet. They're going to sign him to a Supermax extension. They're going to have those guys for 3 and 4 years, minimum, absolute minimum. So in a normal circumstance, it might be really difficult to be like, man, we missed our chance at the finals last year. And then we've got all these guys hurt. They're going to have plenty of opportunities. They're young. It's just all going to depend on the health. Murray should come back well from the knee injury. That's something that we've gotten a lot better at over the last 10 or so years. The back injury stuff, quite frankly, though, does make me nervous with Michael Porter Jr. And when he's healthy, he has the potential to grow into an all-star LNBA caliber guy. And I just hope that he gets the opportunity to do that. And so in the long term, this is obviously a huge hit for Denver. It's something that they're going to have to continue to deal with. It's one of those things that can always be in the back of your mind. He's now one of those guys, he's a Kristaps level guy where it's like, is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be healthy? And there's 2 different ways that goes. Either he's a really bad contract in 3 years that can't stay on the floor, or, think back to, he's not going to be Steph, but think back to the beginning of Steph's career where he couldn't stay on the floor because of ankle injuries and just constantly having problems with that. And he figured it out. He got the right plan together, and moving forward, he was fantastic with it. And I'm sure Denver's medical staff do everything they can to make sure that Porter Jr. is good to go. And, as it relates to the extension, I'm sure they did all the due diligence in the world and they felt he was ready to go and healthy when they offered him as much money as they did. And it's just an unfortunate situation. So this is huge news as it relates to Denver's title chances this year, the long-term outlook of one of the more up-and-coming teams in the entirety of the Western Conference. And unfortunately, for Michael Porter Jr. himself, who, had a trajectory here, not necessarily at the beginning of the season, but in his career as a whole, that pointed towards him being a potential, all-star over the next couple of seasons. So hopefully he gets healthy. It stinks for Denver. They're still going to be fun. Jokic is still awesome. I want him to have a shot at one of these at some point while he's still in his prime, and there's just no realistic way that's going to happen for them this year. And that's going to be the end of today's video. I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on screen. If you enjoyed this one as well, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Hope you guys have an awesome start of your week and awesome rest of your Monday as well, and I will see you all next time.